A millionaire despised her, until their wedding night revealed her secret. Where are you watching from? Subscribe and hit that like button to discover how her purity changed everything. The champagne spilled over the white silk dress when Nathaniel pushed the glass forcefully, refusing to toast his own wedding. The guests fell silent in the Virginian estate, filled with wrought-iron lanterns and arrangements of magnolias imported from Charleston, while the groom, a 41-year-old businessman known for his fortune amassed in the Boston and Cape Cod real estate market, crossed the stone patio without looking back. Eleanor, barely 21, remained standing before the altar decorated with cotton branches, holding the bouquet of white gardenias with trembling hands, her clear eyes fixed on the heavy wooden door through which he had disappeared. No one there knew that this marriage hadn't been born of love, but from a cold business agreement between traditional families from Charleston and Boston, sealed to save her father's failing historic plantation and expand his empire. Sometimes the heaviest chains are those we voluntarily choose to bear, thought Eleanor, as a solitary tear ran down her pale cheek, mixing with the makeup carefully applied since dawn. The light of the Virginian sunset filtered through the estate's windows, bathing the scene in a golden hue that cruelly contrasted with the coldness emanating from that union. Eleanor's father, William Beaumont, a proud 60-year-old man with a face marked by years of work on the Charleston plantation, clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. His wife, Margaret, gently touched his arm, wordlessly reminding him of the agreement they had sealed with the Harringtons. An agreement that would save 4 generations of Southern plantation tradition in exchange for their only daughter's future. Nathaniel Harrington had walked through the gardens until reaching a small pond away from the celebration. The sound of water fell like background music to his turbulent thoughts. He loosened his silk tie while breathing deeply the scent of jasmine and rosemary that permeated the air. His reflection in the water showed an attractive man with hard features, prematurely graying at the temples that gave him a distinguished air, and dark eyes that rarely revealed his emotions. "I won't fall into this trap again," he murmured to himself, remembering the humiliation he had suffered years ago. "This marriage is just another contract, a business transaction. No feelings, no vulnerabilities." Meanwhile, inside the estate, the young bride apologized to the guests with a dignity that surprised even those who knew her. Her voice didn't tremble when she announced that the celebration would continue without the groom, that dinner would be served as planned, and that she herself would thank everyone for their presence. Beneath Eleanor Beaumont's fragile appearance hid a spirit forged with the same fierceness that had characterized Southern women for generations. Destiny had just united 2 people who, paradoxically, firmly believed in never depending on anyone else. What neither of them knew was that this disastrous beginning was merely the first chapter of a story that would transform their lives in ways they could never have imagined. The Beacon Hill townhouse in Boston seemed too large for 2 people living as strangers under the same roof. 3 weeks had passed since the wedding, and Nathaniel and Eleanor had established a silent routine that minimized their encounters. The mornings belonged to him. He had breakfast early on the terrace, reviewing documents and making calls before she awoke. The afternoons were Eleanor's territory, when he locked himself in his office lined with mahogany, surrounded by the aroma of fine cigars and freshly brewed coffee. The sound of their footsteps was the only sign that alerted one to the other's presence. They had perfected the art of sharing space without sharing life. That October morning, however, fate forced an inevitable encounter. Nathaniel was returning earlier than expected from a cancelled meeting when he found Eleanor in the second-floor library. The amber light of the Boston afternoon filtered through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on her, as she carefully cleaned a collection of old books she had discovered abandoned on the shelves. "I didn't know you were interested in literature," he said, startling her. His deep voice resonated in the high-ceilinged room. Eleanor turned, carefully holding a leather-bound copy of The Scarlet Letter. She wore her brown hair in a casual ponytail and was dressed in simple jeans and a white t-shirt that contrasted with her fair skin. "There are many things you don't know about me," she replied with a calmness that concealed her nervousness. "I studied English literature for 2 years before all this." Nathaniel observed her with curiosity. In the weeks they had been living together, they had barely exchanged more than polite phrases during the obligatory Sunday dinners they shared, a tradition he maintained more out of habit than desire. "Why didn't you finish your degree?" he asked, moving toward one of the windows. The question sounded casual, but they both knew the answer. I suppose Beaumont Plantation needed my sacrifice more than America needed another literature student, she answered, placing the book back on the shelf. Her fingers caressed the binding with reverence before withdrawing. The silence that followed was charged with tension. Nathaniel approached the shelves and examined the books she had been cleaning. You have good taste, he finally conceded. This collection belonged to my grandfather. No one had touched it in years. Beautiful things shouldn't be abandoned, Eleanor responded with an intensity that surprised him. These books contain thoughts, dreams, entire worlds. They deserve respect. Their gazes met briefly, and for an instant, something indefinable passed between them. Then, as if remembering who they were and why they were there, both retreated to their respective safe zones. Dinner will be at 9, he said, heading toward the door. My mother is coming. Eleanor nodded, understanding the implicit message. Act as the perfect wife before the Harrington matriarch, maintain appearances, fulfill the unwritten contract they had signed when they married. When Nathaniel left, she approached the window where he had been moments before. Boston stretched out beneath the reddish evening sky. The unmistakable profile of the State House, the perfectly aligned streets of Back Bay, the blue line of the Charles River in the distance. A city as beautiful and as foreign to her as the man to whom she had tied her destiny. In his office, Nathaniel distractedly reviewed some documents, while his mind returned repeatedly to the image of Eleanor in the library. There was something in the way her eyes lit up when talking about literature, something authentic that contrasted with the world of appearances and manipulations in which he moved daily. It disturbed him, and he didn't know why. He took his phone and called his assistant. Pierce, I need you to investigate something for me, he said in a controlled voice. I want to know more about Eleanor Beaumont's studies before our marriage. Everything you can find. As he hung up, he wondered why he felt the need to know more about the woman who technically was his wife, but who in reality was little more than a stranger living under his roof. A stranger with eyes that reflected worlds he had never explored. Dinner with Victoria Harrington was exactly what Eleanor expected. A silent power battle disguised as Boston cordiality. Nathaniel's mother, a 60-year-old woman impeccably preserved thanks to Boston's best plastic surgeons, scrutinized her with calculating eyes while talking about the city's high society. You should accompany Nathaniel to the charity event at Symphony Hall next week, said Victoria while savoring dessert. It's important that the Harringtons show family unity. Nathaniel observed the interaction from his end of the table, apparently focused on his glass of California Cabernet. He noticed how Eleanor maintained her composure, with a dignity that was surprising for someone so young. Of course, Victoria, Eleanor responded with a polite smile. I'd love to get to know my husband's social circles better. The way she pronounced my husband contained a nuance that only Nathaniel perceived, a subtle mixture of irony and resignation that provoked an unexpected pang of guilt in him. When Victoria finally left after critically but discreetly inspecting every corner of the townhouse, Nathaniel found Eleanor on the terrace, contemplating the city lights. The Boston fall brought cool but pleasant nights, perfect for observing the city from the heights. You did well, he said, offering her a glass of the same wine they had been drinking during dinner. It was the first time he had initiated a conversation without practical necessity. Eleanor accepted the glass with a gesture of barely contained surprise. Thank you, your mother is intense. A fleeting smile appeared on Nathaniel's lips. That's a kind description. Most find her terrifying. Southern women don't scare easily, Eleanor responded, taking a sip of wine, although I must admit her comment about my accent was quite cutting. What did she say? Asked Nathaniel, genuinely curious. Oh, just that she hoped my southern peculiarities wouldn't be a problem at social events. Eleanor perfectly imitated Victoria's condescending tone, provoking another smile from Nathaniel. The silence that followed was, surprisingly, less awkward than previous ones. They were sharing for the first time something that vaguely resembled complicity. Don't let it affect you, Nathaniel finally said. She protects her territory like a lioness. She's always been that way. Eleanor looked at him directly, her clear eyes reflecting the city lights. And you? Do you also protect your territory like that? The question floated between them, laden with implicit meanings. Nathaniel turned his gaze toward the horizon, where the silhouette of the Boston skyline was outlined against the night sky. "I built my own walls," he responded, with an honesty that surprised himself. "And I don't allow anyone to scale them." "Walls can protect you from invaders, but they can also become your own prison," observed Eleanor, finishing her wine. "My daddy always says that fear builds the highest and most resilient walls." Nathaniel observed her with renewed interest. He had expected to find in her a superficial young woman, perhaps ambitious or calculating, but each conversation revealed layers of complexity that defied his expectations. "Your father sounds wise," he commented. "He is," she responded with a nostalgic smile. "He's also stubborn, proud, and too traditional, but he would give his life to protect those he loves and what he considers right." "Do you miss him?" The question arose spontaneously. Eleanor nodded, allowing Nathaniel for the first time to glimpse the vulnerability beneath her facade of serenity. "Every day, him, my mother, the marshes, the Atlantic coast." The sense of belonging. Something stirred inside Nathaniel, a distant echo of emotions he thought he had buried years ago. He recognized in Eleanor's eyes a type of loneliness that was painfully familiar to him. Before he could respond, Nathaniel's phone rang with the melody he had assigned for urgent work matters. The moment of connection evaporated as quickly as it had arisen. "I have to take this," he said, returning to his professional and distant tone. "Good night, Eleanor." As he walked away, he didn't see how she continued to observe him, with a thoughtful expression that mixed curiosity and something akin to compassion. "Good night, Nathaniel," she whispered to the Boston wind, wondering how many secrets those walls he had mentioned really held. The routine continued during the following weeks, but something subtle had changed. Their encounters, although brief, had lost some of the initial tension. They occasionally shared comments about the weather, news, or preparations for social events. Nothing deep, nothing personal, but it was more than they had had before. On a rainy November afternoon, Nathaniel returned home early. The streets of Boston had turned into impromptu rivers, and an important meeting had been cancelled. He took off his soaked coat in the foyer, while Mrs. Sullivan, the Irish housekeeper who had worked for his family for decades, hurried to offer him a towel. "The master is soaked through," exclaimed the woman with her characteristic Dublin accent. "I'll prepare a hot coffee immediately." "Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan," replied Nathaniel, drying his hair. "Where is Eleanor?" "The missus went out a few hours ago before it started raining. She said she was going to the Brattle bookshop on West Street," explained Mrs. Sullivan as she collected the wet coat. "She hasn't returned yet." Nathaniel nodded and headed to the main living room, where a fire was crackling. He sat in one of the leather sofas and began reviewing some documents he had brought with him. That's when he saw it, a blue-covered notebook forgotten on the coffee table. He recognized Eleanor's elegant handwriting on the cover, where she had simply written "Thoughts." He hesitated for a moment. Invading another person's privacy went against his principles, but curiosity was stronger. He opened the notebook and began to read. The pages were full of poems written in English, deep reflections on displacement, loneliness, and hope. Intricate drawings of southern landscapes adorned the margins. Charleston Harbor seen from the Battery, the marshes of the Low Country, architectural details of traditional plantations. One poem in particular caught his attention. "Between walls of ancient stone and dreams of the open sea, my heart drifts aimlessly, seeking harbors no longer mine. Boston shines golden and proud, beautiful in its urban pride, but its lights do not warm, one born among southern mists. What is a surname worth? What price has tradition? I've paid with my freedom, debts that were never mine. And yet, on silent nights, when moonlight bathes Beacon Hill, I feel that, perhaps here too, I could learn to build a home." Nathaniel reread those verses several times, feeling a strange mixture of emotions. He had expected to find criticisms of him, perhaps complaints about her situation or calculated plans. Instead, he discovered the authentic voice of a woman who had sacrificed her dreams out of family loyalty, who silently suffered her displacement, but who surprisingly kept hope alive. The sound of the front door opening startled him. He quickly closed the notebook and returned it to its place, just as Eleanor entered the room, shaking the rain from her hair. "What a downpour," she commented, taking off her wet coat. She stopped upon seeing Nathaniel by the fireplace, clearly surprised to find him home at that hour. I didn't expect to see you until tonight. The meeting with the Japanese investors was cancelled, he explained, trying to maintain a casual tone. Apparently, even business stops when Boston decides to become Venice. Eleanor smiled at the comment, a genuine smile that illuminated her face. Nathaniel noticed, as if seeing her for the first time, how expressive her eyes were. They changed from a greyish blue to a clear green depending on the light, the moment, the emotion that filled her. I bought some books, she said, showing him a paper bag that she had protected under her coat. Boston classics that I wasn't familiar with. I thought I could better understand this land by reading its poets. Nathaniel found himself genuinely interested. Which ones did you choose? Poems by Emily Dickinson, some works by Henry James and Nathaniel Hawthorne, she answered, taking out the books to show him. The bookseller recommended I start with The House of the Seven Gables. That's a good choice, Nathaniel nodded. My grandfather used to say that you can't understand New England without having read Hawthorne. A comfortable silence settled between them as Mrs. Sullivan entered with 2 steaming cups of coffee and a tray of traditional Boston cream pies. I've brought coffee for the missus too, announced the woman with a warm smile. With this cold, it'll do you both good. When Mrs. Sullivan left, Eleanor approached the window to observe the rain hitting the glass. You know, in Charleston we say that rain cleanses the soul as well as the air. Perhaps today Boston needed a good cleansing. Nathaniel observed her, thinking of the poems he had just read, of the complex and sensitive woman who hid behind the facade of the obedient wife she showed to the world. Eleanor, he began, not knowing exactly what he wanted to say. The Symphony Hall event is this Friday. If you prefer not to attend, I can go alone. You don't need to fulfill all the social obligations if you don't feel comfortable. She turned, clearly surprised by the offer. Why do you say that? Have I done something that makes you think I wouldn't be up to it? No, on the contrary, he responded quickly. I just thought you might prefer to have time for yourself to adapt at your own pace. These events can be overwhelming. Eleanor studied him for a moment, as if trying to decipher his true intentions. Finally, she shook her head. I'll go with you, she said with determination. I'm your wife before the world, aren't I? Let's fulfill our roles in this play we've agreed to perform. There was a quiet strength in her voice that Nathaniel couldn't help but admire. This woman, whom he had initially underestimated, possessed a dignity and fortitude that few people in his circle demonstrated. As you wish, he conceded, getting up to head to his office. At the door he stopped and added almost without thinking, Blue will suit you well, it matches your eyes. He left the room before she could respond, confused by his own spontaneous comment and by the strange feeling of anticipation he felt at the thought of attending the event with Eleanor by his side. Boston's Symphony Hall shone that night, like the cultural jewel it was for the city. The annual charity gala brought together the Boston elite in a display of elegance, power, and, of course, rivalries barely disguised beneath perfect smiles and polite conversations. Nathaniel adjusted his bow tie in front of the foyer mirror while waiting for Eleanor. He wore an impeccable tuxedo that accentuated his athletic figure and the distinguished bearing he had perfected over years in the most exclusive business circles. His platinum watch, inherited from his grandfather, was the only adornment he allowed himself. The sound of heels on the marble floor made him turn. Eleanor was descending the main staircase with a natural grace that momentarily left him speechless. She wore a long midnight blue silk dress that perfectly fitted her slender figure before falling in a soft cascade to the floor. Her brown hair was gathered in a low chignon that highlighted the elegance of her neck and shoulders. A simple pearl necklace, a traditional gift from her mother on her wedding day, completed the ensemble. "Do I look presentable?" she asked upon reaching him, with a touch of nervousness in her voice that contrasted with her serene appearance. Nathaniel observed her for a moment longer than necessary. "You look perfect," he finally responded, surprised by the sincerity that imbued his words. The journey to Symphony Hall passed mainly in silence. Nathaniel briefly explained who would be the most important people present at the event, and which connections could be beneficial for his business. Eleanor listened attentively, nodding and occasionally asking pertinent questions that revealed her sharp intelligence. "Remember," he said when the car stopped in front of the imposing neoclassical building on Huntington Avenue, "the Winthrops are in the process of divorce, although they'll appear together tonight. The Callahans just lost an important contract with our group, and the Prestons—" are your closest competitors in the Cape Cod real estate sector, but James Preston is also your nephew's godfather, so you maintain a cordial relationship in public, Eleanor completed naturally. I've been studying, Nathaniel. I won't embarrass you. He looked at her with surprise and something akin to respect. I never thought you would. The society photographer's cameras flashed as soon as they set foot on the red carpet. The Harringtons, murmured some guests as the couple advanced toward the interior. She's a Southerner, they say, an arranged marriage to save her family's plantation. Nathaniel, accustomed to rumors, maintained his impassive expression while greeting acquaintances with just the right courtesy. However, he noted with some admiration how Eleanor handled each encounter with a perfect blend of humility and dignity. She didn't try to desperately impress like many newcomers to Boston high society, but neither did she appear intimidated or insecure. The evening progressed as expected: superficial conversations, exchanges of business cards, empty promises of future collaborations. All the social ritual that Nathaniel knew to perfection and executed with the precision of someone who had grown up in that world. The surprise came during dinner. They were seated at a table with the Boston mayor, a well-known Italian gallery owner, the director of an important museum, and a couple of Swiss bankers. The conversation turned to contemporary American art and, specifically, to a recent exhibition about Edward Hopper. An overrated artist, in my opinion, commented the Swiss banker's wife with that tone of someone who issues absolute truths. Too abstract, too. American, if you'll permit my frankness. Nathaniel prepared himself for the uncomfortable silence that usually followed potentially offensive comments at these dinners. But then Eleanor spoke in a clear and calm voice. I believe that precisely that American essence you mention is what makes Hopper universal, she said, capturing the attention of the entire table. His ability to transform the everyday, the local, into symbols that transcend borders. As a Southerner, I recognize in his work the same spirit that animates our culture, the deep connection with the land, with matter, with collective memory. The Italian gallery owner nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. Hopper achieves what few artists do, speaking from the particular to reach the universal. Have you seen his permanent collection at the MFA? Only in photographs, I'm afraid, Eleanor responded. It's on my list of pending visits along with the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. The conversation flowed from that moment on, with Eleanor participating intelligently but never dominantly, demonstrating a knowledge of contemporary art that Nathaniel didn't know she possessed. He observed her with growing fascination, discovering an articulate and cultured woman who radically contrasted with the image of a simple bargaining chip he had associated with her until then. Later, during the charity concert, Nathaniel found himself paying less attention to the international soprano, performing on stage, and more to the woman seated beside him, whose eyes shone with genuine emotion at Puccini's arias. He noticed how she discreetly contained her tears during a particularly moving passage, how her small but strong hands applauded enthusiastically at the end of each performance. Upon leaving Symphony Hall past midnight, they were approached by Abigail Thornton, Boston's most feared society journalist, known for her incisive questions and her ability to detect hidden tensions. Mrs. Harrington, what do you think of Boston after these months? It must be a big change from Charleston, she asked with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Nathaniel tensed imperceptibly, preparing to intervene if necessary, but Eleanor responded with a serene smile. Boston is teaching me to see the world with new eyes, Mrs. Thornton. As Ralph Waldo Emerson said, do not go where the path may lead. Go instead where there is no path and leave a trail. I'm learning to love this city at its own pace, discovering its secrets day by day. And in that my husband is my best guide. She took Nathaniel's arm naturally, as if it were a habitual gesture between them, and gave him a warm look that left the journalist momentarily speechless. In the car, on the way back to the townhouse, a different silence settled between them. It wasn't the usual tension, but something more complex, charged with unasked questions and tacit acknowledgments. You were brilliant tonight, Nathaniel finally said, looking through the window at Boston's deserted streets. Everyone was impressed. Even you? She asked softly. He turned to look at her and responded with an honesty that surprised himself. Especially me. When they arrived home, Nathaniel stopped before going up to his bedroom. Eleanor, he called, causing her to turn on the middle of the staircase. "Tomorrow, I have to go review a project on the Cape. If you're interested, you could accompany me. There's an interesting exhibition at the Cape Cod Museum of Art." The surprise on Eleanor's face was evident, but quickly gave way to a cautious smile. "I'd love to," she responded simply. That night, in their separate bedrooms, both remained awake longer than usual, thinking about what had happened and what this subtle but undeniable change in their relationship meant. The trip to Cape Cod marked a turning point. During the journey in Nathaniel's Audi, they discovered they could maintain conversations that went beyond forced courtesy. They talked about literature, art, even some childhood memories. Nothing too intimate, but enough to start seeing each other as real people, and not as the roles they represented in their marriage of convenience. The visit to the Cape Cod Museum of Art revealed a different Nathaniel, passionate about modernism and a deep connoisseur of the work of regional artists. Eleanor listened, fascinated, as he explained anecdotes about the artists that didn't appear in tourist guides. "My grandfather knew Edward Hopper, you know," he commented, as they observed a collection of watercolors. "He always said that Hopper was as eccentric in private as in public, but that behind that facade was a brilliant and methodical mind." "Like some people I know," Eleanor responded, with a meaningful look that made Nathaniel look away, uncomfortable with the precision of the observation. Afterward, they visited one of the properties his company was rehabilitating, an old Cape Cod-style house overlooking the Atlantic that would be converted into a luxury boutique hotel. Eleanor was surprised to see how Nathaniel treated the workers with genuine respect, how he knew their names and asked about their families, how he attentively listened to their technical suggestions. "I thought you were the typical businessman who only looks at numbers and profits," she commented, as they walked along the beach at sunset after the visit. Nathaniel picked up a flat stone and threw it into the sea, making it skip several times on the surface before sinking. "I am in part," he admitted, "but my grandfather started as a carpenter in the 50s. He never allowed me to forget where our family comes from, despite my mother's efforts to reinvent our origins." Eleanor smiled at this revelation that humanized her enigmatic husband. "My great-grandfather began with a single acre of land," she shared. "Each generation added a little more, sacrificed a little more. It's a crushing responsibility sometimes, don't you think? The weight of family expectations." Nathaniel looked at her intensely, as if for the first time truly seeing the woman he had married. "Is that what you feel? A crushing responsibility?" Eleanor looked away toward the horizon, where the sun was beginning to sink into the sea, tinting the sky with orange and violet hues. "It's not always something negative. It gives purpose, belonging. But sometimes I wonder what I would have chosen if I had really had the option." A reflective silence settled between them as they continued walking, their footprints leaving parallel tracks in the damp sand. "And you?" she finally asked. "If you had had a choice, would you have chosen this life?" The question floated in the air, laden with implications. Nathaniel considered his answer for a long time. "There was a moment when I believed I had all the options in the world," he finally said, his voice barely audible over the sound of the waves. "I was 28, in love, and planning a completely different life. Then I discovered that she—" He stopped abruptly, as if he had said more than he intended. "She betrayed you?" Eleanor gently completed. Nathaniel nodded, surprised by the ease with which she had interpreted his silence. "In the worst possible way. With my best friend for years while I was working to build our future, everyone knew except me." The bitterness in his voice was palpable, an old pain still not healed. "I'm sorry," said Eleanor, and there was such genuine sincerity in her words that Nathaniel felt something break inside him, a small crack in the armor he had built around his heart. "It was a long time ago," he responded, trying to downplay it, although they both knew that wound still defined many of his current decisions. The return to Boston that night was different. They shared dinner at a small roadside restaurant where no one knew them, and for the first time they spoke as two people getting to know each other, not as two strangers united by a matrimonial contract. In the days that followed, they established a new routine. They dined together almost every night, sharing increasingly personal conversations. Eleanor began to occasionally accompany him to business events where her intelligence and tact proved to be valuable assets. Nathaniel, in turn, surprised her with tickets to concerts and exhibitions that he knew would interest her. It wasn't love, not even complete friendship, but it was a beginning. A cautious truce between two people who had entered this marriage with minimal expectations and who now discovered, surprised, that they might be able to build something more meaningful than a simple social facade. But the shadows of the past and the complications of the present lurked at the margins of this fragile connection, and soon, very soon, they would put these first foundations to the test. The news arrived on a Tuesday morning while they were having breakfast on the terrace. Mrs. Sullivan entered with a pale face, holding the Boston Globe as if it were a dangerous object. "Sir, ma'am, I think you should see this," she said, handing the newspaper to Nathaniel. In the society section, a headline stood out with provocative typography: "Trouble in the Harrington Paradise?" The young Southern wife frequently seen with a mysterious compatriot in discreet Back Bay cafes. Next to the text, a blurry photograph showed Eleanor animatedly conversing with a man on a cafe terrace. The image was taken from afar, but it captured a moment when both were smiling, creating an impression of intimacy. Nathaniel raised his gaze to Eleanor, his face an impenetrable mask. "Anything you'd like to explain?" Eleanor took the newspaper with trembling hands and read the entire article, which suggested with malicious insinuations that the Harrington marriage might be facing difficulties and that the young wife was seeking comfort in the arms of an old flame. "It's Caleb, my cousin," she explained, indignation evident in her voice. "He came to Boston for work last week, and we met for coffee. He's a history professor at the University of South Carolina and is researching the Southern diaspora during the Civil War." She breathed deeply, trying to control her anger. "Do I really need to justify who I have coffee with?" Nathaniel observed her in silence for a few seconds that seemed eternal. Finally, he carefully folded the newspaper. "No," he responded in a controlled voice. "You don't need to justify yourself. But you should understand that in Boston, every move we make is under scrutiny, especially since—" He stopped, as if doubting whether to continue. "Since what?" Eleanor asked, visibly tensing. "Since my previous relationship and how it ended," he completed. "The tabloid press had a field day then, and now with our marriage that everyone knows is a convenient arrangement," she finished, with a bitterness that surprised them both. Mrs. Sullivan had discreetly withdrawn, leaving them alone with the growing tension. "What people think doesn't matter," Nathaniel finally said, getting up to head to his office. "But I would suggest being more careful with your public meetings, for both our sakes." Eleanor stopped him, taking his arm firmly. "If we're going to live under the same roof and play this role before the world, I deserve your trust, Nathaniel. Or at least the benefit of the doubt." Their gazes met in a silent challenge. Finally, he nodded briefly and left, leaving her alone with the newspaper and a feeling of frustration that threatened to drown him. The incident seemed to return their relationship to the early days of distance and formality. Nathaniel went back to his long days at the office and coming home late. Eleanor, for her part, intensified her visits to museums and libraries, creating a routine that minimized their encounters. But the seeds of mistrust had been planted, and not just by the newspaper article. One night, while Eleanor slept, Nathaniel received a call from his mother. "Son, I'm concerned," said Victoria without preamble. "My sources tell me your wife maintains frequent contacts with people of dubious reputation. There are even suggestions of connections with certain extremist Southern elements." Nathaniel felt the air thicken in his lungs. "What are you insinuating exactly, Mother?" "I'm just saying that perhaps you should investigate more thoroughly the woman you married. Appearances deceive, and Southerners, well, you know how they are. Proud, closed, with that obsession with their land." "Eleanor isn't like that," he responded automatically, surprising himself by how quickly he had come to her defense. "Are you sure?" insisted Victoria. "Do you really know her after these few months? Think about what happened the last time you blindly trusted someone." His mother's words pierced like needles into old wounds. After hanging up, Nathaniel remained for a long time by his office window, observing Boston's lights while doubt slowly corroded the fragile foundations of trust he had begun to build with Eleanor. The next day he made a decision that he knew could destroy any possibility of a real relationship with his wife. He hired a private investigator to follow her movements and verify her contacts. During the following 2 weeks, He lived in a constant state of internal contradiction. On one hand, he genuinely enjoyed the moments they shared, conversations during dinner, Sunday mornings exploring little-known corners of Boston, even discussions about books or movies that revealed their different perspectives. On the other hand, each night he compulsively reviewed the detective's reports, seeking to confirm or deny the suspicions sown by his mother. The crisis arrived when Eleanor announced she would travel to Charleston for a few days. Her father had suffered a relapse in his heart condition, and she needed to be with him. "Of course," said Nathaniel, with a formality that concealed his suspicions. "How long will you be gone?" "I don't know exactly," she responded, studying his reaction. "It will depend on how he progresses. Do you mind if I'm away?" There was a vulnerability in her question that Nathaniel decided to ignore, protected behind his defensive walls. "It's your family. You should go." Eleanor nodded slowly as if expecting something more that didn't come. "Thank you. I'll leave early tomorrow." That night, while preparing her small suitcase, Eleanor accidentally found one of the detective's reports that Nathaniel had forgotten in the library. Photographs of her entering bookstores, cafes, museums, details of her phone conversations with her mother and cousin, even captures of her emails to former university classmates. The discovery was like a dagger to the heart. After the initial shock, an icy calm took over her. With precise and controlled movements, she finished packing, adding more clothes than she would need for just a few days. Before dawn, she left a brief note on the dining room table. "Now I understand why it's so difficult for you to trust, but I am not the one who betrayed you in the past, and I don't deserve to pay for those mistakes. I'm going to Charleston. Don't follow me or wait for me." When Nathaniel found the note and understood what had happened, he felt the ground open beneath his feet. His first impulse was to call her, but his wounded pride prevented him. He told himself it was better this way, that this marriage would never have really worked, that his suspicions were justified by past experiences. But in the silent nights that followed, the townhouse seemed emptier than ever. He found himself passing through rooms where Eleanor's presence had left a mark. The library with the books she had carefully organized, the terrace where they used to have breakfast, the music room where he sometimes heard her playing the piano, believing no one was listening. A week after her departure, guilt and regret finally overcame his pride. He called Pierce, his driver, and most trusted personal assistant. "Prepare the car," he ordered. "We're going to Charleston." Charleston received Nathaniel with a typical Atlantic storm. The leaden sky merged with the choppy ocean as waves furiously hit the Battery Promenade, creating a spectacle as beautiful as it was threatening. The rain fell obliquely, pushed by a persistent wind that seemed to want to expel unwanted visitors. Pierce drove cautiously through the steep streets of the historic district. "Are you sure you want to do this, sir?" he asked, observing his boss through the rearview mirror. "We could wait for the storm to abate." "No," Nathaniel responded firmly. "I've waited too long already." Finding the Beaumont house wasn't difficult. The ancient antebellum mansion crowned one of the hills overlooking Charleston Harbor, surrounded by cotton fields that descended the slopes in carefully constructed terraces. Despite its evident age and need for repairs, the property retained an air of dignity that commanded respect. Nathaniel breathed deeply before ringing the wrought-iron bell. The door was opened by an elderly woman with a severe face but kind eyes, who looked at him with evident surprise. "I'm Nathaniel Harrington," he introduced himself, water dripping from his coat. "I'm looking for Eleanor." The woman, who must have been Margaret, Eleanor's mother, studied him for a few seconds before responding in an English with a strong southern accent. "My daughter does not wish to see you, Mr. Harrington." "I understand," he said, not moving. "But I've come from Boston to talk to her. Just a few minutes, please." "For what?" "To hurt her more." The voice came from inside the house. William Beaumont, Eleanor's father, appeared next to his wife. He was a man of fragile appearance due to illness, but with a penetrating gaze that reminded him of his daughter's. "We know your methods, sir. Hiring detectives, spying, distrusting. You are not welcome here." Nathaniel wasn't intimidated. "I made a mistake," he admitted in a clear voice. "A terrible mistake based on my own fears and past experiences. I'm not here to justify myself, but to ask Eleanor for forgiveness, face to face." The parents exchanged a meaningful look. Finally, Margaret sighed. "She's not here," she said. She went to St. Michael's Church. With this weather, she's probably still there. Nathaniel nodded, grateful. Thank you. How do I get there? Follow the cobbled path that borders the property, toward the harbour, indicated William. But be careful. The storm is worsening, and those paths can be treacherous for those who don't know them. I'm not afraid of a storm, Nathaniel responded, turning to leave. It's not the storm that should worry you, said the man, making him stop. It's my daughter's wounded heart. Eleanor gave up everything to save us, her dreams, her freedom, her future. If you're not capable of valuing that sacrifice, you'd better leave right now. The words hit Nathaniel harder than the rain. He inclined his head in a sign of respect and began walking along the indicated path, rejecting Pierce's offer to accompany him. The path proved more difficult than he expected. Steep, slippery from the rain, and whipped by a wind that seemed determined to prevent him from advancing. But he continued, step by step, while reflecting on the words of Eleanor's father and on his own past actions. St. Michael's Church finally appeared before his eyes. A small colonial construction situated on a promontory jutting into the harbour. The place seemed taken from a medieval tale, solitary and mystical beneath the storm. He entered silently, shaking the water from his clothes. The interior was illuminated by candles that created an intimate and warm atmosphere that contrasted with the fury of the elements outside. And there she was, seated in one of the wooden pews, contemplating the altar with an absorbed expression. "Eleanor," he called softly. She turned, and surprise quickly gave way to an expression of contained pain. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to see you," he responded, approaching but maintaining a prudent distance. "Talk to you. Explain." "There's nothing to explain," Eleanor interrupted, standing up. The flickering light of the candles illuminated her face, thinner than he remembered, with dark circles that spoke of sleepless nights. "I understand perfectly. You don't trust me. You never have. For you, I'm just part of a business deal, a stranger in your house, someone to watch." The bitterness in her voice was like a slap. Nathaniel took another step toward her. "You're wrong," he said, with a broken voice. "At the beginning, yes. I saw you that way. But then I began to know you, to respect you, to admire you even, and that terrified me." "It terrified you to respect me?" she asked, incredulous. "It terrified me to feel something for you," he confessed, the words tumbling out. "After what I went through, I swore I would never be vulnerable again, that I would never allow anyone to have the power to hurt me. And then you arrived, with your intelligence, your dignity, your quiet strength, and began to tear down my defenses. When I saw that article in the newspaper, when my mother sowed doubts, it was easier to return to the old patterns of suspicion than to admit what really frightened me." "And what was that?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely audible above the roar of the storm. "That I was beginning to fall in love with my own wife," Nathaniel responded with a brief laugh devoid of humour. "Ironic, isn't it? After all our agreement, our marriage of convenience. It turned out that the real danger wasn't that you would betray me, but that I wouldn't know how to handle what I was beginning to feel." Eleanor looked at him steadily, searching for any sign of manipulation or falsehood. She found only raw and sincere vulnerability in Nathaniel's eyes, an expression she had never seen on him before. "Why should I believe you now?" she finally asked. "How do I know this isn't another strategy to maintain appearances, to make me return and continue our matrimonial charade?" "You can't know," he admitted. "I can only ask that you give me the chance to prove it with actions, not words, and I'll understand if you decide it's too late, that the damage is done. I just wanted you to know the truth before making your final decision." Lightning illuminated the church interior through the small windows, followed by the crash of thunder. Eleanor shuddered involuntarily. "I've always loved storms," she said, looking toward the window. "My daddy says they clean the air and the soul, that after a good storm everything seems new, clearer." She turned to Nathaniel. "But some storms only leave destruction in their wake." "And some," he responded softly, "reveal what was hidden and allow us to build something new and stronger on the foundations that have resisted." They remained in silence for what seemed an eternity, the sound of rain and sea as the only accompaniment to their thoughts. "I can't return with you now," Eleanor finally said. "Not like this. I need time to think, to heal, to decide if I can trust you again." Nathaniel nodded, accepting her decision, although he felt something breaking inside him. I understand. I'll be at the Charleston Place Hotel until Friday. If you decide to talk, you know where to find me." He turned to leave, but Eleanor's voice stopped him. "Nathaniel," she called. "Why now? Why did you really come?" He looked at her over his shoulder, his silhouette outlined against the church door. "Because for the first time in my life, pride seemed too high a price to pay for losing someone who really matters." And with those words, he went out into the storm, leaving Eleanor alone with her thoughts and with a decision that could change the course of both their lives. The storm subsided during the night, but Nathaniel barely slept. He had checked into a suite at the Charleston Place Hotel with a view of the harbor, where the waters were still choppy beneath a clearing sky. The first lights of dawn found a haggard man with incipient beard and bloodshot eyes after hours of contemplating the sea and his own past decisions. Pierce found him like this when he brought him breakfast and the newspapers he had requested the night before. "Do you want me to prepare for the return to Boston, sir?" he asked, concerned about his boss's appearance. Nathaniel shook his head. "We'll wait until Friday, as I said. I have pending matters here." He didn't specify what these matters were, and Pierce, after so many years in his service, knew when not to ask questions. With a nod of his head, he withdrew discreetly. Alone in the room, Nathaniel made a decision. If he wanted to prove to Eleanor that he had really changed, that he was willing to trust and be vulnerable, he needed concrete actions, not just nice words pronounced in the emotional moment of a reunion. His first step was to make a call to Boston, to his personal lawyer. "I need you to prepare some documents urgently," he indicated in a firm voice, "a modification of the marriage agreement with Eleanor Beaumont." Next, he called his financial director. "I want a complete report on the current situation of Beaumont Plantation and an investment and recovery plan. I need it today." After a quick shower and change of clothes, Nathaniel headed to Charleston's commercial district. He entered a small traditional jewelry store where the owner, an elderly man with trembling hands but precise eyes, attended him personally. "I'm looking for something special," explained Nathaniel. "Not a conventional ring, but something with history, something unique." The jeweler studied him for a few seconds and then, with an enigmatic smile, went to the back of the store. He returned with a small, carved wooden box. "This came into my hands 30 years ago," he explained as he opened the box, revealing a white gold ring with an intricate design that blended traditional southern motifs. In the center, instead of a diamond, shone an aquamarine of deep blue. "It belonged to a family that had to flee during the Civil War. They asked me to keep it until someone worthy claimed it." Nathaniel took the ring, admiring its timeless beauty and the symbolism of its design. "It's perfect," he murmured. "Can you engrave it inside?" The jeweler nodded. "What inscription would you like?" Nathaniel reflected for a moment. "Trust and love," he finally said, in English, simple and direct. While the jeweler worked on the engraving, Nathaniel continued with his plan. He visited the city's oldest bookstore, where he purchased first editions of several Southern poets and a special edition of To Kill a Mockingbird, remembering how Eleanor had shown interest in this work in Boston. His last destination was the local market, where he acquired typical Southern products: Carolina rice, local wines, artisanal preserves from the coast. They weren't ostentatious gifts, but details that demonstrated attention to and respect for Eleanor's culture, for the roots she so valued, and that he had initially underestimated. Back at the hotel, he found the reports he had requested waiting for him. The situation at Beaumont Plantation was worse than he imagined. Debts accumulated over years, obsolete equipment, fierce competition from more modernized producers. But there was also potential: cotton of excellent quality, invaluable traditional knowledge, a unique terroir that could produce exceptional crops with proper investment. He worked until well into the night, preparing a detailed plan to save Eleanor's family plantation. Not as a condescending favor from the rich Boston businessman, but as a serious investment based on recognizing the real value of the Southern agricultural tradition. A plan that respected the Beaumont family's autonomy while providing the financial and technical resources necessary for their survival and growth. On Thursday morning, 2 days after their meeting at the church, Nathaniel received an unexpected call. "Mr. Harrington," William Beaumont's deep voice sounded surprisingly strong for a convalescent man. "I'd like to invite you to dinner tonight at our home." Nathaniel couldn't hide his surprise. "May I ask to what I owe this honor?" "Let's say I'm interested in getting to know better the man my daughter married," responded William, with a tone that didn't reveal his intentions. "At 8, and come prepared to try a good homemade bourbon." The call ended before Nathaniel could respond. He wondered if Eleanor was aware of this invitation, or if it was a personal initiative of her father. In any case, it was an opportunity he couldn't reject. That night, upon arriving at the Beaumont mansion, he was received by Margaret, whose serious expression had softened slightly. "My husband awaits you in the study," she indicated, conducting Nathaniel through the old house. "Eleanor isn't here. She's gone to visit her cousin in Savannah. She'll return tomorrow." The study was an austere but welcoming room, with walls covered in dark wood and shelves full of books. William Beaumont was seated next to the lit fireplace, his fragile figure wrapped in a traditional southern wool blanket. "Sit down," he said, indicating the armchair across from him. On the low table that separated them was a bottle of bourbon and 2 small glasses. "Before we talk, let's drink. It's tradition in this house." He served the amber liquid in both glasses and offered one to Nathaniel, who accepted it with respect. They drank in silence, the warmth of the alcohol mixing with the warmth of the fireplace. "I received an interesting call today," began William, observing Nathaniel over the rim of his glass, "from your lawyer in Boston. Something about modifications to your marriage agreement with my daughter." Nathaniel maintained his calm, although he was surprised by the speed with which his lawyer had acted. "That's right. I want to change the terms of our agreement. To give Eleanor control over 50% of your companies on the Cape," continued William, "and to establish an irrevocable trust that guarantees the future of our plantation, regardless of what happens between you two." He paused, studying Nathaniel's reaction. "Why would a calculating businessman like you do something like that?" "Because I'm not just a calculating businessman anymore," Nathaniel responded with sincerity. "At least I don't want to be." "Not with Eleanor." William observed him in silence for a long moment, as if evaluating not only his words but every nuance of his expression. "My daughter believes you only see this marriage as a contract, a business arrangement. Is that true?" "It was," admitted Nathaniel. "When we married, I saw Eleanor as part of a transaction. But people change, Mr. Beaumont, sometimes in ways they don't expect themselves." William nodded slowly, serving more bourbon in both glasses. "Do you know why I agreed to this marriage?" he asked, his voice softening. "It wasn't just for the plantation, although that weighed heavily. It was because I saw something in you when you came to propose it, something that perhaps you didn't even know was there." "And what was that?" asked Nathaniel, genuinely intrigued. "Loneliness," responded William simply. "A deep loneliness, hidden behind success and arrogance. The same I've seen in my daughter's eyes since her mother and I accepted this arrangement." He paused, looking toward the dancing flames. "We Southerners believe there are destinies that are written in the stars, connections that transcend human plans." Nathaniel didn't know how to respond to this unexpected revelation. He had never considered that Eleanor's father might have seen beyond the facade he presented to the world. "I don't know if what I feel for Eleanor was written in the stars," he finally said, "but I know it's real, even if it took me too long to recognize it and even longer to accept it." "And what will you do if she decides not to return?" William asked directly. "I'll respect her decision," Nathaniel responded without hesitation. "The changes to the marriage agreement will remain, the support for the plantation too. They're not conditions for getting her back, but consequences of what I've learned thanks to her." William smiled for the first time since Nathaniel had entered the house, a tired but genuine smile. "My daughter returns tomorrow," he said, finishing his drink. "I suggest you be at the harbor at sunset. It's been her favorite place since she was a child, a good place to talk, or to say goodbye." When Nathaniel left that night, he felt a mixture of hope and fear. He had passed the father's test, but the final decision was in Eleanor's hands. And if there was one thing he had learned about her in these months, it was that she had a will as firm as the mountains that surrounded her native land. Friday dawned with a surprisingly clear sky over Charleston. The sea, still rough after the storm, shone intensely under the autumn sun, creating silver sparkles that danced on the waters of Charleston Harbor. Nathaniel spent the morning walking through the city, trying to calm the anxiety that grew within him as the moment to meet Eleanor approached. He visited the Battery Park, contemplating the majestic mansions. He walked through the streets of the French Quarter, occasionally stopping to observe the colourful facades of traditional shops. He even sat for a while on the steps of St. Michael's Church, watching the comings and goings of Charlestonians, resuming their routine after the storm. In every corner, he saw reflections of Eleanor, her culture, her roots, the elements that had forged her character. He now understood why she felt so uprooted in Boston, so far from this land that seemed to breathe history and tradition through every stone. At noon he received a message from his lawyer confirming that the documents were ready and had been duly registered. The modified marriage agreement was now official. Eleanor Beaumont was now co-owner of a significant part of his business empire, and Beaumont Plantation had the financial backing necessary for its recovery and modernization, regardless of what happened between them. With each passing hour, Nathaniel's restlessness increased. What if Eleanor didn't come to the meeting? What if she had decided it was too late, that the damage was irreparable? What if this entire trip, all these gestures, proved useless against the weight of the mistrust that he himself had sown? At 6 in the evening, Nathaniel headed to the old harbour, where traditional boats gently rocked on the waters. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, tinting the sky with orange and pink hues. He sat on a wooden bench, the carefully wrapped package beside him, the small jewelry box weighing in his coat pocket. The minutes passed with torturous slowness. Couples strolled hand in hand. Elderly people contemplated the sea with the wisdom of those who have seen many sunsets. Children ran chasing seagulls. But no sign of Eleanor. When the sun almost touched the horizon, Nathaniel began to accept the possibility that she wouldn't come. Perhaps her father hadn't transmitted the message, or perhaps he had, but she had decided not to attend. In any case, he would have to accept her decision and return to Boston alone, carrying the weight of lost opportunities and feelings not expressed in time. He stood up, ready to leave, when he saw her. Eleanor was walking slowly along the harbour, her silhouette outlined against the reddish evening sky. She wore a simple blue dress and a knit cardigan over her shoulders to protect herself from the sea breeze. Her hair, loose for once, swayed gently in the wind. Nathaniel held his breath as she approached. He had rehearsed 1,000 times what he would say, the explanations he would give, the arguments he would present. But seeing her there, every rehearsed word evaporated from his mind. "You came," he said simply when she stopped in front of him. Eleanor nodded, her clear eyes studying him with an indecipherable expression. "My father said you wanted to see me here. I was afraid you would decide not to come," Nathaniel admitted. "I was afraid too," she responded, surprising him. They sat on the bench at a prudent distance from each other, while the sun continued its descent toward the horizon. "I've been thinking a lot these days," Eleanor began, looking toward the horizon. "About us, about this strange marriage we have, about what I want for my future." Nathaniel waited, giving her the space she needed to express herself. "When I agreed to marry you," she continued, "I did it out of duty, out of loyalty to my family, to save something that had taken 4 generations to build. I thought I could endure anything as long as I protected that legacy." She paused, her fingers nervously playing with the edge of her dress. "But I didn't expect to find myself feeling things I shouldn't feel for a man who only saw me as part of a contract." "Eleanor," Nathaniel began, but she raised a hand to stop him. "Let me finish, please. When I discovered you were investigating me, that you had hired someone to follow me, to spy on my conversations, I felt something breaking inside me. Not just because of the invasion of my privacy, but because I thought I would never be more than a suspect to you, a stranger to distrust." "I was wrong," said Nathaniel, unable to contain himself any longer. "I judged you based on my own fears, on my own wounds. But the truth is that little by little, without realizing it, you began to be much more than a wife on paper. I began to see you, to really know you, and that terrified me." "Why?" she asked, looking at him directly for the first time. "Because it meant being vulnerable again," he confessed. "Risking feeling again. For years I built my life ensuring that no one could hurt me again, that no one would have that power. And suddenly there you were tearing down my defenses with your intelligence, your dignity, your way of looking at the world. It was easier to suspect you than to admit what was really happening." "And what was happening?" insisted Eleanor. Nathaniel took a deep breath. It was the moment of truth, of complete vulnerability. "That I was falling in love with you," he said in a firm voice, despite the inner trembling. "Not with the marriage agreement, not with the social facade, but with you. With the woman who reorganizes abandoned libraries, who passionately discusses Edward Hopper, who knows Frost and Dickinson by heart. With the woman who sacrificed her dreams out of family loyalty, but who never lost her essence in the process." Eleanor looked at him intently, searching for any sign of falsehood or manipulation in his words. She found only raw sincerity, authentic vulnerability. "How can I trust that this is real?" she finally asked. "That you won't change your mind when we return to Boston, when routine returns, when rumors start circulating again?" Nathaniel reached for the package he had brought with him and handed it to her. "This is for you, not to buy you, not to manipulate you, but because I want you to understand that I see who you really are." Eleanor unwrapped the package carefully. Inside she found the first editions of Southern Poets, the special edition of To Kill a Mockingbird, the carefully selected traditional products. But what made her catch her breath was an official envelope containing the documents for the new marriage agreement and the recovery plan for her family's plantation. "What is this?" she asked, leafing through the documents with incredulity. "It's my way of proving that this isn't a game for me," explained Nathaniel. "That I trust you completely, not just with my feelings but also with my future, with everything I've built, and that I want to help save your family's legacy not as a condescending favor, but as a partner who values and respects what it represents." Eleanor quickly read the documents, her eyes widening with surprise as she understood the scope of the changes. "This is too much," she said finally. "I can't accept it." "It's not a gift," clarified Nathaniel. "It's an acknowledgement of your value, of your contribution to this society we've formed, voluntarily or involuntarily, and it's irrevocable. Even if you decide not to return with me, even if you decide to end this marriage, these changes will remain." Eleanor looked at him with new eyes, as if seeing for the first time the real man behind the facade of the Boston businessman. "Why would you do something like this?" she asked in a low voice. "Because I love you," he responded simply. "And because true love doesn't set conditions, doesn't demand guarantees, doesn't establish contracts. It simply gives, even if there's no certainty of receiving anything in return." The sun was already touching the horizon, projecting long shadows over the harbor. Nathaniel took the small jewelry box from his pocket and opened it, revealing the ring with the aquamarine. "This marriage began as an agreement, without feelings, without real promises," he said, holding the ring between them. "I would like it now to be a choice, your choice. If you decide to give me another chance, if you believe we can build something real on these imperfect foundations, I would like you to accept this ring, not as a symbol of possession or contract, but as a promise of respect, trust, and love." Eleanor looked at the ring, then at Nathaniel, as the last ray of sun reflected on the aquamarine, creating sparkles that resembled the harbor in calm. "Trust and love," she read in the interior inscription. "Trust and love. The two elements that were missing in our marriage," confirmed Nathaniel. "The two elements I want to build with you day by day if you give me the opportunity." Eleanor remained silent for what seemed like an eternity, her gaze alternating between the ring and Nathaniel's expectant face. In that charged silence was all the complexity of their relationship. The cold beginnings, the misunderstandings, the wounds, but also the undeniable connection that had grown between them despite all the barriers. Finally, with trembling fingers, she extended her hand to him. The return to Boston was very different from the journey down. Instead of tension and uncertainty, Nathaniel's car now carried hope and new possibilities. Eleanor observed through the window how the green and mountainous landscape of the Carolinas gradually gave way to the more urban Northeast, a transition that seemed to symbolize the bridge they were beginning to build between their two worlds. The ring with the aquamarine shone on her left hand, occasionally attracting her gaze as if she needed to confirm that all this was real. She had accepted giving them a second chance, not as part of a contract or out of obligation, but as a conscious choice based on feelings she could no longer nor wanted to deny. "What are you thinking about?" asked Nathaniel, noticing her thoughtful expression as they crossed into Massachusetts. "About bridges," she responded, smiling at her own metaphor, about how they're built between distant shores and allow two different worlds to connect without either losing its essence. Nathaniel took her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers in a gesture that still felt novel but surprisingly natural. I like that image, a bridge between the South and New England, between Charleston and Boston, between your world and mine. Building bridges takes time, reflected Eleanor, and solid foundations. You can't improvise or rush. We have time, he assured, gently squeezing her hand, and I'm willing to work on those foundations every day. The Beacon Hill townhouse welcomed them with the warmth of New England autumn light filtering through the stained glass windows. Mrs. Sullivan awaited them at the entrance, her face lighting up upon seeing Eleanor return with Nathaniel. "Mrs., what a joy to see you again," exclaimed the Irish woman, spontaneously embracing Eleanor. "The house wasn't the same without you." Eleanor returned the embrace, moved by the sincere welcome. "Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan. I miss this house too, and those who inhabit it." That night they dined on the terrace beneath the Boston stars. A simple but intimate dinner, prepared by Mrs. Sullivan with Southern and New England products, in a culinary blend that united their cultures. For the first time since they had married, they shared the table not as strangers united by a contract, but as two people rediscovering each other, now with honesty and vulnerability as the main guests. "I want you to resume your studies," said Nathaniel, as they savored a traditional Boston dessert. "Harvard has an excellent literature program, or you could continue in Charleston if you prefer. We could adapt." Eleanor looked at him, surprised. "Are you serious?" "Completely," he assured. "You should never have had to give up your dreams, and although I can't change the past, I can help build the future you desire." "I've always dreamed of opening a bookstore specializing in first editions," confessed Eleanor, allowing herself to vocalize an ambition she had kept hidden for years. A space that would be more than a business, a cultural meeting point, a bridge between diverse literary traditions. "We could make it a reality," said Nathaniel, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. "I know a perfect location in Beacon Hill, with old walls and original arches. I was thinking of converting it into offices, but it would be an ideal space for a bookstore with character." They stayed up late on the terrace, sharing dreams and ideas, discovering with surprise how much they had both changed since that first cold and distant dinner months ago. The days that followed established a new normalcy between them. Nathaniel deliberately reduced his hours at the office to spend more time with Eleanor, showing her his Boston, not that of social and business events, but that of small literary cafes, artisan workshops in Cambridge, historic corners that tourists rarely visited. She, in turn, introduced elements of her Southern culture into their shared life. Traditional music during breakfasts, family recipes she patiently taught to Mrs. Sullivan, Southern expressions and words that he began to learn with genuine interest. One afternoon, while they were browsing together at the Boston Public Library looking for rare books, Nathaniel received a call that changed his expression. Eleanor immediately noticed the tension that took hold of his face. "It was my mother," he explained after hanging up. "She wants to have dinner with us tomorrow. Says she has important news to share." Eleanor breathed deeply, aware that Victoria Harrington represented one of the biggest challenges for their renewed relationship. The matriarch had never hidden her disapproval of the Southern daughter-in-law, and had been one of the main sources of distrust in the most difficult moments. "It had to happen sooner or later," she said calmly. "I'm ready to face it." Nathaniel took her face in his hands, a gesture of intimacy that still felt novel to them but increasingly natural. "This time will be different," he promised. "We're in this together, really together. I won't allow anyone, not even my mother, to come between us." The dinner with Victoria was exactly as tense as they expected. The woman arrived at the townhouse impeccably dressed and made up, with the aristocratic coldness that characterized her. She barely acknowledged Eleanor's return with a brief nod, before focusing on her son. "Nathaniel, dear, I have concerning news," she announced once they were seated at the table. "My sources inform me that the shares of Harrington Ventures have been redistributed. Is it true that you've ceded control of a significant part of the company to third parties?" The way she looked at Eleanor when saying third parties made it clear to whom she was referring. "I haven't ceded control to third parties, Mother," responded Nathaniel with a firm but calm voice. "I've formally recognized my wife as a partner and co-owner of what we're building together." Victoria visibly paled. "Have you lost your mind? Everything your father and grandfather built, everything you yourself worked to expand, handed over to a stranger you've barely known for a few months?" "I know Eleanor better than you think," replied Nathaniel, maintaining his composure. "And I trust her completely, both personally and professionally. It's a decision made with full awareness and one I won't reconsider." "And what will happen when she tires of playing Boston businesswoman and decides to return to her southern marshes? When she takes half your assets with her?" insisted Victoria, ignoring Eleanor's presence as if she weren't seated at the same table. It was then that Eleanor intervened, with a calm voice that contrasted with the growing tension. "Victoria," she said, deliberately using her first name, "I understand your concern for your son's well-being and for the family legacy. It's something I understand perfectly, having grown up myself in a family with 4 generations of tradition behind it." She paused, holding the older woman's gaze without hostility, but with firmness. "But I believe the time has come for us to know each other beyond assumptions and prejudices. My commitment to Nathaniel goes far beyond business agreements or social conveniences. I love him, and I'm willing to build a future with him, where we both grow and support each other." The silence that followed her words was absolute. Victoria looked at her with a mixture of surprise and incredulity, as if seeing Eleanor for the first time. "Love," she finally repeated with a touch of skepticism. "Such a convenient concept when there are millions of dollars at stake." "Mother," intervened Nathaniel with an unusual harshness in his tone, "that's enough. I won't allow you to continue speaking to my wife like this in our home. If you can't respect our relationship and our decisions, perhaps we should postpone these meetings until you can." Victoria seemed genuinely impacted by her son's firmness. For years, Nathaniel had allowed her intrusions, her barely veiled criticisms, her subtle control over important aspects of his life. This new attitude visibly disconcerted her. "I see you've made your decision," she finally said, recomposing herself. She stood with dignity, leaving the barely begun dinner. "I just hope the day doesn't come when you have to regret it." When Victoria had gone, Eleanor took Nathaniel's hand across the table. "Are you okay? I know how difficult this was for you." He looked at her with a mixture of relief and determination. "Better than okay. For the first time in a long time, I feel I'm making my own decisions, building my life on my terms, not according to others' expectations." That night, as Boston slept beneath a starry sky, Nathaniel and Eleanor remained in the library until late, talking about the future they were beginning to envision together. The bookstore they would open, the trips they would take to know each other's native lands, the shared projects that would unite their passions and talents. For the first time since their marriage, they slept in the same room, not out of obligation or convenience, but by mutual choice. There was no physical intimacy yet. Both felt that step required its own time and space. But the simple fact of sleeping side by side, of waking in the middle of the night and finding the other there, represented a level of trust and connection that months before would have seemed impossible. At dawn, Eleanor awoke to find Nathaniel observing her with an expression of contained wonder. "What is it?" she asked, smiling sleepily. "I was thinking," he responded, gently caressing her cheek, "about how the best bridges are sometimes built after the strongest storms." Spring arrived in Boston with an explosion of color and life that seemed to reflect the transformation in Nathaniel and Eleanor's relationship. The 6 months that had passed since their reconciliation in Charleston had been a period of mutual discovery, of patient but constant construction of that bridge between their worlds that they both envisioned. The Two Worlds bookstore had opened its doors in February, occupying the Beacon Hill space that Nathaniel had mentioned that night on the terrace. Under Eleanor's passionate direction, and with Nathaniel's logistical and financial support, the place had quickly become a cultural reference point in the city. It housed carefully selected first editions, organized bilingual readings of poets from different American regions, and offered a welcoming space where literary traditions from diverse cultures dialogued in harmony. Eleanor had also resumed her literature studies at Harvard, finding a balance between her new academic life, managing the bookstore, and her increasingly active role in some of Nathaniel's business projects, where her cultural sensitivity and intelligence contributed valuable perspectives. For his part, Nathaniel had experienced a transformation that surprised those who had known him for years. The cold, calculating businessman gradually gave way to a more complete man, who found satisfaction not only in professional successes, but also in small shared moments, prolonged breakfasts on the terrace, evening walks along the Charles River, conversations about literature and philosophy that extended into the early morning. Even his relationship with Victoria had evolved. After the tense dinner, mother and son had maintained a prudent distance for weeks, until Victoria's unexpected health problem led to a cautious reconciliation. To the surprise of both, it was Eleanor who insisted on visiting her mother-in-law in the hospital, and who with patience and firmness began to build bridges with the Harrington matriarch as well. "I never thought I'd say this," commented Pierce to Mrs. Sullivan one afternoon while waiting to take Nathaniel to a meeting, "but the sir seems happy, really happy." Mrs. Sullivan nodded, observing through the window how Nathaniel and Eleanor shared a moment of complicity in the garden. "True love transforms, Pierce, even the hardest hearts." That spring also brought their first joint visit to Charleston since their reconciliation. They travelled to Charleston for William Beaumont's birthday, but also to supervise the progress in modernizing Beaumont Plantation, which was beginning to show promising signs of recovery under the new management plan. The Beaumont house shone under the golden April sun when they arrived. The cotton fields that descended the slopes showed the first green shoots, and an air of renewed hope seemed to permeate the property that months before had been wrapped in worry and uncertainty. Margaret received them with a warm embrace. Her previous reservations toward Nathaniel visibly dissipated. "Welcome home," she said, deliberately including her son-in-law in that significant word, home. William, whose health had notably improved, waited on the porch. At 61, with his face weathered by decades of work under the southern sun, he showed a renewed vitality. "Just in time," he greeted, embracing first his daughter, and then, with genuine affection, Nathaniel. "The new harvest is almost ready for sampling." The birthday celebration gathered the entire extended Beaumont family, uncles, cousins, close friends who were considered almost relatives. For Nathaniel, accustomed to the formal and distant social relations of his Boston circle, the warmth and spontaneity of the Southern family was initially overwhelming but quickly captivating. He observed with fascination how Eleanor subtly transformed when surrounded by her people. Her Southern expressions flowed naturally, her gestures became more expressive, her laughter freer. Far from feeling excluded, Nathaniel found himself grateful for this glimpse of the essence of the woman he loved, of the roots that had formed her character. After the meal, which extended for hours according to Southern tradition, William invited Nathaniel for a walk through the plantation. They walked in silence for a time, admiring the view of Charleston Harbor that extended in the distance. "I never thought I would say this," William finally confessed, "but I'm proud to call you family, Nathaniel." The words, pronounced with the direct sincerity characteristic of the Southern patriarch, deeply moved Nathaniel. "The pride is mutual," he responded with a slightly broken voice. "Your daughter has taught me more about the value of family and roots than I ever thought possible to learn." William nodded, satisfied. "The strongest cotton plants are those that sink their roots deeply, but extend their branches toward the sun," he said, pointing to the plants surrounding them. "Like people, we need to know where we come from to decide where we're going." "Eleanor never forgot her roots," observed Nathaniel. "And you are rediscovering yours," responded William with insight. "Not those imposed by society or others' expectations, but the true ones, those that connect with what really matters." They continued walking among the rows of cotton plants, the conversation flowing to practical matters about the plantation and future plans. But those words remained with Nathaniel, resonating deeply. That night, in the room they shared in the family house, Eleanor found Nathaniel contemplative by the open window, through which entered the fresh southern breeze. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, approaching to embrace him from behind. "About roots," he responded, covering her hands with his. "About how sometimes we need to return to our origins to find the way forward." He turned to look at her, the moonlight illuminating her soft features. "I want to show you something tomorrow. An important place for me." The next morning they drove for 2 hours until reaching a small town in the Massachusetts interior. The houses of colonial architecture aligned in narrow streets that ascended a hill, crowned by a church. The place seemed frozen in time, alien to the hurry of the modern world. "My grandfather was born here," explained Nathaniel as they walked down the main street. before emigrating to Boston after the Great Depression, before starting as a carpenter, and eventually founding the construction company that would be the origin of the entire Harrington empire. Eleanor looked at him with surprise. Nathaniel had never spoken in detail about these humble origins of his family, which contrasted with the aristocratic image that Victoria strived to project. "My mother always tried to hide this part of our history," he continued, as if reading her thoughts. "For her, the convenient narrative began with success in Boston, not with the rural roots in a small town in the interior." They stopped in front of a modest but well-preserved house, with a worn shield above the lintel. "This was his house," said Nathaniel in a soft voice. "The last time I came here I was 12, and my grandfather insisted on showing it to me against my mother's wishes. He told me something I never forgot. You will never be truly rich if you forget where you come from." Eleanor squeezed his hand in a sign of understanding. "It's a beautiful gift that you've brought me here, that you share this part of yourself with me. I wanted you to see that I too have deep roots, although I've spent years pretending they didn't matter," explained Nathaniel. "And I wanted to tell you right here that I'm ready to intertwine our roots, to create something new that honors both your heritage and mine." He took a small box from his coat pocket, different from the one that had contained the aquamarine ring months ago. "It's not a ring this time," he clarified at Eleanor's surprised expression. "It's something more personal." Inside the box was an old key of wrought iron with an intricate design on the handle. "What does it open?" she asked, intrigued. "Our future," Nathaniel responded with a smile. "I bought a house on the North Carolina coast in the Outer Banks, a traditional house overlooking the Atlantic, and with enough land to plant a small experimental cotton field if we wanted. A place that could be our refuge, our second home, a physical bridge between Boston and your land." Eleanor looked at him with eyes bright with contained emotion. "Are you serious?" "Completely," he assured. "We'll continue living mainly in Boston, where our projects and your university are. But I want you to have an anchor in your land, a place where you can reconnect with your roots when you need to. And I want it to be our place, built with shared memories from the beginning." Eleanor embraced him tightly, too moved to speak. In that simple but deeply significant gesture, Nathaniel demonstrated that he truly saw her, that he understood the importance her southern roots had in her identity. "I love you," she finally whispered against his chest. "Not for the gifts or the grand gestures, but for how you've learned to see my heart and respond to what it really needs." They kissed there, in front of the ancestral Harrington house, under the curious gaze of some locals who wondered who these emotional strangers were on their quiet street. It was a kiss that sealed not only their present love, but also a promise of a future where their roots, so different and yet complementary, would intertwine to nurture something new and beautiful. That afternoon, before returning to Charleston, they visited the house that Nathaniel had acquired. The structure of wood and stone with more than 200 years of history rose majestically on a hill overlooking the Atlantic. It needed renovations, but its fundamental solidity and rustic beauty were undeniable. "I want us to design it together," said Nathaniel as they toured the high-ceilinged rooms with ancient wooden floors. "I want every decision, from the beams to the furniture, to be made by both of us." Eleanor nodded, already imagining how they would transform that space into their shared refuge, into the physical symbol of that bridge between worlds they had been patiently building. At nightfall, as they returned to Charleston under a starry sky, Eleanor rested her head on Nathaniel's shoulder. "Do you know what's most beautiful about all this?" she asked softly. "What?" he responded, not taking his eyes off the winding road. "That we began as strangers united by a contract, and now we're choosing each other every day with open eyes and conscious hearts. It's not a love born of fairy tales or romantic illusions, but built on shared truths and overcome difficulties, and for that, I believe it can be stronger and more lasting than any other." Nathaniel took her hand and kissed it gently. "Like the ancient cotton plants that survived the fiercest storms," he said, remembering William's words. "Exactly," smiled Eleanor, "because our roots are intertwining more deeply every day." Summer arrived in Boston with its usual East Coast intensity. The streets bustled with locals enjoying the weather, the squares filled at sunset, and the city's fountains offered the only relief from the persistent heat that enveloped the metropolis. For Nathaniel and Eleanor, that summer also marked the first anniversary of their wedding. Not the anniversary of that cold and formal ceremony that had culminated with Nathaniel abandoning the Virginia estate, but the anniversary of the day they truly began to build something genuine from that improbable beginning. Preparations to celebrate this significant date were underway, but first they had to face a different challenge: Eleanor's official presentation as a partner and co-owner of Harrington Ventures before the board of directors and the group's main shareholders. Although her position had been legally secured for months, this would be the first time she would actively participate in a high-level meeting, personally presenting a project she had developed: the creation of a cultural foundation funded by the business group to promote artistic and literary exchange between different regions of the United States, beginning with New England and the South. The night before the presentation, Eleanor nervously reviewed her notes in the office they now shared in the townhouse. Nathaniel observed her with a mixture of pride and concern. "You'll do perfectly," he assured, gently massaging her tense shoulders. "You know the project better than anyone, and your passion for it will be evident to everyone." "It's not the project that concerns me," confessed Eleanor, turning to look at him. "It's facing all those people who see me as the opportunist, the Southern intruder, who somehow managed to hook the great Nathaniel Harrington and get hold of part of his empire. Those rumors will fade when they see you in action," he responded with conviction. "Your intelligence, your vision, your cultural sensitivity, all those qualities will speak louder than any corridor gossip." Eleanor smiled, grateful for his confidence, although the disquiet persisted. It wasn't just the presentation that kept her awake that night. There was another important piece of news she hadn't yet shared with Nathaniel, news that would change their lives forever, and that she planned to reveal during their anniversary celebration. The morning of the presentation dawned clear and bright. Eleanor chose a navy blue suit, professional but with a distinctive touch in the small details of Southern design on the cuffs. The aquamarine ring shone on her hand, a constant reminder of the path traveled and the trust built between them. The boardroom on the top floor of the Harrington Ventures corporate building was full when they entered. Familiar and unfamiliar faces turned to observe them, and Eleanor noticed the evaluative glances that ran over her from head to toe, the barely disguised whispers. Among those present was Victoria, who had insisted on attending despite her official retirement from business affairs. Her expression was inscrutable, although the slight nod she directed at Eleanor could be interpreted as a cautious acknowledgement. James Preston was also there, Nathaniel's main competitor and occasional collaborator, a man known for his shrewdness and for never making a move without a purpose. His presence was not usual at these meetings, which added an element of additional tension. Nathaniel formally opened the session with his usual calm authority, presenting the agenda and then giving the floor to Eleanor for her presentation. He discreetly squeezed her hand under the table before she stood, a gesture of support worth more than 1,000 words. During the next 40 minutes, Eleanor presented her project with clarity and passion. She explained how the Cultural Bridges Foundation would not only be a corporate social responsibility initiative that would improve the group's public image, but also a strategic investment in cultural capital that could open new business opportunities in sectors where Harrington had not traditionally been present. Her mastery of the subject, her ability to respond to complex questions with ease, and especially her innovative vision that connected the economic with the cultural, gradually gained the attention and respect even of the most skeptical. When she finished her presentation, an evaluative silence settled in the room. It was Victoria who spoke first, to everyone's surprise. "I must recognize," she said with her usual aristocratic tone, but with an unusual hint of approval, "that this project shows a deep understanding of both our corporate values and the new directions that current times demand. It's refreshing to see ideas that combine tradition and innovation in such an organic way." Coming from Victoria, these words were equivalent to extraordinary praise. Eleanor slightly inclined her head in a sign of gratitude, hiding her surprise. The vote to approve the initial funding for the foundation was favorable by a wide margin. Only James Preston and a couple of minor shareholders abstained, though without presenting formal objections. As the attendees began to disperse after the conclusion of the meeting, Preston approached Nathaniel and Eleanor with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "An impressive presentation, Mrs. Harrington," he said, shaking Eleanor's hand with excessive force. "It almost makes one forget the Peculiar origins of your position in this company. Nathaniel visibly tensed, but before he could intervene, Eleanor responded with a serene smile. The origins of any relationship or position are less important than what is built from them. Don't you think, Mr. Preston? As a businessman, you surely value results above beginnings. Preston narrowed his eyes, clearly not accustomed to being put in his place in such an elegant manner. Certainly. Although sometimes beginnings contain seeds that inevitably determine the end, or that produce completely unexpected fruits, countered Eleanor, without losing her composure. As anyone familiar with agriculture well knows, the reference didn't go unnoticed by Preston, who had significant investments in cotton plantations in the South. With a tense nod of his head, he walked away, but not before directing at Nathaniel a meaningful look. "What was that all about?" asked Eleanor when they were alone. Nathaniel sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of contained frustration. "Preston has been trying to orchestrate a hostile takeover of our real estate division on the Cape. He probably hoped your presentation would fail and create division in the board, weakening our position. And instead, he achieved the opposite effect," observed Eleanor. "Exactly," smiled Nathaniel with evident pride. "You were brilliant, my love. Even my mother was impressed, and believe me, that's almost a miracle." They left the corporate building together, deciding to walk down Beacon Street instead of taking the waiting car. It was one of those perfect Boston summer days. Intense blue sky, a light breeze that alleviated the heat, the facades of brownstones glowing under the New England sun. "I feel like I passed a test I didn't even know I was taking," confessed Eleanor as they strolled, her fingers intertwined with Nathaniel's. "In a way you did," he responded. "But the real test was never whether you could impress the board or handle sharks like Preston. The real test was whether I could overcome my own fears and prejudices to see the extraordinary person you are." They stopped in front of the window of an antique store where an old brass gramophone caught their attention. Through the glass, their reflections superimposed on the displayed objects. She in her elegant suit but with that distinctively southern touch, he with his usual Boston air of discreet sophistication. Two worlds that had found a way to complement each other. "I have something special prepared for our anniversary tomorrow," said Nathaniel, resuming their walk. "A small surprise trip." "I have a surprise for you too," responded Eleanor, with an enigmatic smile. "Something that will change our lives forever." Nathaniel looked at her with curiosity, but she merely smiled, keeping her secret for one more day. That night, as Boston illuminated under the starry sky, they celebrated the success of the presentation with an intimate dinner on the townhouse terrace. Mrs. Sullivan had prepared a fusion of Southern and New England dishes, shrimp and grits followed by Boston cream pie, accompanied by a special wine from the renovated Beaumont plantation, the first harvest produced under the new direction. "To the bridges we've built," toasted Nathaniel, raising his glass, "and to all those we'll build together." "To the roots that anchor us and the wings that allow us to fly," responded Eleanor, her eyes shining with the emotion of secrets not yet revealed and the promises that the future held for both of them. In that moment, beneath the New England stars, it seemed impossible to remember that everything had begun with a glass of spilled champagne and a groom who abandoned the altar. Destiny, with its infinite wisdom and unpredictable sense of humor, had transformed the coldest agreement into the most improbable, and precisely for that reason, most authentic love story. The Atlantic stretched like an infinite sheet of cobalt blue under the July sun. From the deck of the sailboat, Eleanor contemplated the New England coast gradually receding, its rocky shores and hidden coves creating a postcard landscape that contrasted with the memories of her native land, the intense greens and the long beaches of the Carolina coast. Nathaniel approached from behind, surrounding her with his arms as the boat gently cut through the waters toward Martha's Vineyard. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, resting his chin on her shoulder. "About contrasts," responded Eleanor, leaning back against his chest. "About how two such different landscapes can be equally beautiful, like two seemingly incompatible people who can create something extraordinary together." Nathaniel smiled, gently kissing her neck. "Philosophizing so early, Professor Beaumont Harrington?" She laughed at the use of her complete name, which she had recently adopted as a symbol of the union of both family traditions. It was one of the many small changes that reflected their joint evolution over the past year. This sailing trip was Nathaniel's surprise gift for their anniversary, a 2-week journey along the New England coast, visiting small islands and ports away from the tourist bustle, a time just for them, to reflect on the path traveled and dream about the future they were building day by day. "Are you ready for my surprise?" asked Eleanor when the captain, following previous instructions, discreetly moved to the other end of the vessel. "I thought the surprise was yours," responded Nathaniel, intrigued. Eleanor turned to face him, taking his hands in hers. Her eyes shone with a mixture of emotion and nervousness that he had learned to recognize when something truly important was about to be revealed. "Nathaniel," she began, her voice soft but firm, "exactly a year ago, under the storm in Charleston, we began to build something real from what had been a simple agreement. You gave me a ring that symbolized trust and love, 2 elements that had been missing in our relationship until then." He nodded, remembering that crucial moment in St. Michael's Church when everything had changed between them. "Now," she continued, "I want to share with you something that symbolizes the next chapter of our story, something that is the fruit of that love and that trust we've cultivated." She took Nathaniel's hand and, with a gentle but meaningful gesture, placed it on her belly. "We're expecting a child," she said with an emotional voice, "a new life that will forever unite our worlds, our bloodlines, our traditions." Nathaniel remained still for an instant, processing the news. Then his face transformed with an expression of amazement and joy so pure that Eleanor felt her heart could burst with happiness. "A child?" he repeated, as if he needed to pronounce the words to fully assimilate their meaning. "We're going to be parents?" Eleanor nodded, tears welling in her eyes. 3 months. I confirmed it last week, but I wanted to wait for this special moment to tell you." Nathaniel embraced her with a mixture of tenderness and fervor, lifting her slightly off the deck in a burst of jubilation. When he set her back down, his own eyes shone with contained tears. "It's the most beautiful gift I could imagine," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "A family. Our family." They stayed like that, embraced under the summer sun, as the boat gently advanced toward the horizon. In that perfect moment, they both felt that the circle initiated with a marriage of convenience was finally completed with the creation of a new life born of true love. That night, anchored in a solitary cove off Martha's Vineyard, they dined by candlelight on the deck. The captain and the small crew had discreetly retired after serving a dinner elaborated with local products, fresh seafood, seasonal vegetables, and a traditional New England dessert. Nathaniel uncorked a special bottle he had reserved for the occasion, serving sparkling apple cider for Eleanor and a small glass of wine for himself. "To our child," he toasted, "and to the extraordinary journey that brought us here." Eleanor smiled, raising her glass. "To our family, the one we've built by choosing each other every day." Under the silvery light of the full moon, Nathaniel extracted a small package from his coat pocket. "I had another gift prepared for tonight," he said, handing it to Eleanor, "but now it takes on a completely new meaning." She unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a small carved wooden box with intertwined traditional Southern and New England motifs. Upon opening it, she found a gold pendant that combined both family shields in a harmonious and elegant design. "It's precious," she whispered, caressing the meticulous details of the craftsmanship. "It was designed by a Boston goldsmith following sketches by a Southern artist," explained Nathaniel. "I wanted it to represent the union of our traditions, of our histories. And now it will also be a legacy for our child, a symbol of their intertwined roots." Eleanor stood and sat beside him, leaning on his shoulder as they contemplated the stars reflected in the calm sea. "Do you remember that day at the Virginia estate?" she asked after a moment of shared silence. "When you refused to toast at our wedding and left?" Nathaniel nodded, caressing her hair. "I wasn't ready then. I was so afraid of being vulnerable again, of trusting again. And I was so resigned to a marriage without love, convinced that sacrifice for my family was the only thing I had left," she added. "If someone had told us then that a year later we would be here expecting a child, deeply in love, we would have thought they were crazy," completed Nathaniel with a smile. "And yet, here we are. Perhaps that's the true miracle, how 2 people can transform each other when they allow themselves to be genuine, when they dare to tear down their walls." Eleanor placed Nathaniel's hand on her belly again, a gesture that had already become natural between them in the few hours that had passed since the revelation. "What do you think they'll be like?" she asked, already imagining the small being growing inside her. "Will they have your eyes? My southern stubbornness?" "I hope they have your heart," responded Nathaniel with sincerity. "Your ability to see beauty in the imperfect, your quiet strength, your unbreakable loyalty. And your brilliant mind," she added. "Your capacity to reinvent yourself, to grow beyond expectations and limitations." They remained silent for a moment, each lost in visions of the future that now stretched before them, full of new possibilities and shared challenges. "We'll have to adapt the Outer Banks house to include a nursery," commented Nathaniel, referring to the southern property they had been renovating during the last few months. "And perhaps expand the townhouse library to include a section of children's books. And think of names," added Eleanor, "something that honors both traditions, but that allows them to create their own identity." Nathaniel nodded, thoughtful. "We have time. What's important is that they'll be loved, that they'll grow knowing both cultures, both lands. They'll have deep roots and strong wings." The night breeze gently caressed the sailboat, creating a rhythmic lullaby that accompanied their conversation. The folded sails cast dancing shadows on the deck, while the moon traced a silver path on the sea that seemed to invite them to follow it toward unexplored horizons. "You know," said Eleanor after a time, "my daddy always says that the most beautiful stories are those that seem impossible at the beginning, like great sea voyages, improbable loves, dreams that seem unattainable until one day, suddenly, they're in front of us, so real we can touch them." "Your father is a wise man," responded Nathaniel. "And he was right that night in Charleston, when he told me he saw something in me that even I didn't recognize then." "What did he tell you exactly?" asked Eleanor, curious. They had never spoken in detail about that private conversation between her father and Nathaniel. "He said he saw loneliness in my eyes," recalled Nathaniel, "the same he saw in yours. And he suggested that perhaps our destiny was written in the stars, beyond contracts and business agreements." Eleanor smiled, thinking of her father's extraordinary intuition. "We Southerners are a bit mystical sometimes," she commented. "We believe in connections that transcend the rational, in destinies that intertwine for reasons that go beyond the evident. And we New Englanders are pragmatic and rational," countered Nathaniel with a smile. "Or at least, that's what I believed about myself until I met you. Now I understand that there are truths that only the heart can comprehend." They kissed beneath the stars, a kiss that contained all they had learned together: patience, vulnerability, mutual acceptance, the capacity to grow through shared challenges. A kiss that sealed not only their present, but also their commitment to the future they were building, with that small miracle already growing within Eleanor. When they finally separated, Nathaniel gently caressed her face, memorizing every detail as if seeing her for the first time: the eyes that changed color with the light, the small freckles that the summer sun had intensified, the soft curve of her lips. "I love you, Eleanor Beaumont Harrington," he said with a firm but tender voice, "not as one loves a dream or an illusion, but as one loves the most beautiful reality, with open eyes, with full awareness, with gratitude for each imperfection that makes us human and unique." "And I love you, Nathaniel Harrington Beaumont," she responded, using the version he had begun to use occasionally in unofficial documents, "with Southern stubbornness and New England passion. With all our contradictions and compliments." The sailboat gently rocked, like an anticipated cradle for the future already growing between them. Boston lay behind, Charleston awaited in the distance, and between both worlds, this small, floating universe where two people who had begun as strangers now celebrated the greatest of connections. "Sometimes," reflected Nathaniel as they reclined to contemplate the stars, "the most beautiful endings are born from the most improbable beginnings, like a glass of champagne spilled on a wedding dress." Eleanor smiled, intertwining her fingers with his. "It's not the ending," she gently corrected. "It's just the beginning of our true story." And as the Atlantic cradled them beneath an infinite sky, they both knew she was right. What had begun as a cold contract between strangers had blossomed into something so deep and transformative that neither of them could have imagined: a love patiently built on foundations of honesty and mutual respect, strengthened by challenges overcome together, enriched by the intertwining of two cultures that, in their apparent contrast, had found perfect harmony. Like the ancient cotton plants that survived the fiercest storms, their intertwined roots now sank deeply into the shared earth of their common history, while their branches extended toward a future full of promises as vast as the horizon that surrounded them.